Or on YouTube. That's good.
Okay. Yeah, so you cut off at such a perfect timing because you said, "Oh, and I've got my first eagle," and it went zip, and it just went straight away. I was like, "No!" And I was talking, I thought, "Oh, he's gone," and then my Wi-Fi, which is just opposite me here, it went red. So every now and again, it will cut off, and I was waiting for it to happen on one of these broadcasts.
You should Ethernet in. I've plugged in with a cable.
Lou's using it as well. I don't know. Does that impact it?
It'll impact the Wi-Fi more than the Ethernet. The Ethernet will be faster. So if you were to plug a cable directly into it, that will help.
But would Lou's then connection be bad?
It wouldn't change. If anything, it'd probably make hers a bit better, I think.
Oh, okay.
You're sharing the Wi-Fi signal, whereas you're not using the Wi-Fi signal at all if you're plugging in. There will be an impact on speed, but it's just the two of you. It depends on how much speed you're getting on your Wi-Fi.
Not much. Yeah, it's not great. Yeah, so mate, tell me about your eagle.
I played really well this past week, and it was just one of those. If I'm honest, it was a very short par 5. But what made it incredible, what made it absolutely incredible, and we knew this week we'd started doing this thing called Eagle Watch. I play with a guy who's off 5 handicap. I don't want to say it because he's going to get
kind of, you know.
Yeah, he's a bit of a dick when you talk about how good he thinks he is. So yeah, very very much like you.
Not exactly like me, not like me.
And I think what's interesting with that dynamic, we both hit it the same distance, and I shouldn't be as bad as I am because I can play stretches of golf as good as he can. And I can hit the ball as far as he can. And this was one of those holes where we went toe to toe. But he's off of a 5. Now we were competing. We were doing the setup where it was there's 4 of us, so we swapped teammates, and the person who had the most points, the most wins. So we went sort of match play, your team versus mine. Then I swapped partners. So I wanted to be on the most winning teams, and he was on the other team. And he's a 5 handicap. I'm an 18. So on this hole, I had a shot and he didn't. So I had 6 shots to get a par. He had 5. Now I did get a proper eagle. So it was into the wind. I ended up having this 190-yard shot. So for anybody who doesn't watch golf, 190-yard shot. What's this channel about, Veg Beauty? We have a comment. Did you see that, Hugo?
No, where is it?
So Veg Beauty, what is this channel about? We talk about a bit of everything, and we were just talking about the fact that I thought I had COVID, and now we're talking about my holiday. So hopefully that is entertaining to you. I'm just talking about, sounds more like bearded sports. See,
it's a fair point.
It's fair point. Fair. I can't argue with it. I just want to point out we have hours of content out there, and we're being judged on this 2 minutes. So I have to get through this story. So it's going to be bearded sports for the next couple of minutes. However, I'm going to transition because I have a greater point to make. So anyway, I get on the green. So you're with me here. I get on the green, and I ended up having a 190-yard shot, a really long shot. For those that don't golf, for those who have no idea about it, I hit just an incredible shot. And my mate hits an incredible shot onto the green, and he is 2 inches away from the hole. And that's almost an albatross, which is incredible. I end up hitting my putt, and it just falls in, celebrates. He ends up hitting his putt, which he would have had to have hit an albatross to beat me, and it was an incredible experience. But it made me think about one thing, and that is, people that are good at golf, they define what they're good at early on, and you know what it is. Like there's certain things. So in your life, are there things that you're good at, or you think, on this earth, I do this better than anybody else? And it made me think about that because I just had that one moment playing golf where I did something better than most people could. Now that was a fleeting moment, and in golf, there's a bit of luck. But what is that one thing that you think you do quite well, that you think you could be elite at, or could have been elite at?
That's a great question. I think from a sporting perspective, I think if I had been consistent in one sport, I am adamant I would have been a professional. Had I just stuck with one, because I have a lot of other characteristics that would have seen me through. My issue was that I wanted to try too many things and changed direction too many times to really become a master in one. But I think from general sport, in terms like football, basketball. I think I could have gone down the path and made it and got paid for doing those things. I'd shown enough early promise in order to do that. So I think that would kind of stand me out. I think from a non-sporting perspective, so for Veg Beauty's perspective, I think I have a rare blend of someone that can be what I think is more like a true masculine, where someone that can be, no, because I'm being serious there as well, right? So bear with, it's someone that can basically be sensitive and listen to someone talk about their deepest, darkest emotions and hurt feelings and really open up to me. And I can be totally 100% with them and listen and give them advice if need be, or just listen, support them, empathize with them. At the same time, I can be someone that can, you know, challenge people in a difficult position, say you're out of line for doing that. And maybe, you know, I'm not scared of looking stupid or being confrontational if needed, if I feel something's wrong or unjust. So from like a management leadership perspective, from my contact now, I'm dealing with a lot of people, a lot of new people. It's something I've just noticed in myself. I notice people more often than not tend to be on one side or the other. That they're just, you know, really lovely people, but they kind of lack that courage to kind of step out and step away from society and isolate themselves by being bold. Or it's the other way, they're just brash. This is who I am, deal with it. So yeah, from a more personal level, I think I haven't found too many people like me, and I actually think you're one of them. I think you're very similar to this. You kind of toe the line well of being able to be sensitive, nurturing, and a good listener. I have a blend actually of the feminine and masculine kind of qualities from both sides.
Yeah, me being very down the middle drives my wife crazy. I think the reason I raised that, it just made me think, you know, you have these moments where now I'm 42, I'll be 43 soon. And you know, people that are elite at things start early on, as far as you find your niche and then you build out on that. And there's a huge cross section of people, if not the majority of the world, who are in a position where they're doing stuff they kind of like, they're kind of searching for who they are and haven't really found that one thing, or they're not performing that one thing they're elite at. And golf was one of those things where, and my mates who watch this are going to make fun of me, but I genuinely believe if I started golf at 8, I could have at least had a job in golf. I had natural swing with that. Well, in philosophy, so we got a comment. I'm going to come back to that. And I think when I look at myself, I just wonder if there's ever a skill set that you're given that doesn't translate to today's standards, for example. So what Veg Beauty has said, by the way, we have another comment. And thank you for commenting, Veg Beauty. It's good to have somebody watching. Well, in philosophy, there's the allegory of the cave, where the person who steps out as an individual gets killed. That's an interesting, it's the best comment I think we've ever had.
I would agree. Yeah.
The allegory of the cave, where the person who steps out as an individual gets killed. I'm not bright, so I have to read that out loud a few times to really process that.
So this is my process, and Veg Beauty, tell me if I'm wrong, but like, you know, this is our human nature, and that you have to be brave to step out. You have to be brave to go against society, because we get isolated. And the reason that people worry about fitting in and being nice and appealing is because there's genuine issues with that. So in this case, that example that she's used is when an individual goes outside, they're in trouble. Plato's, there you go. So I've not heard that before, but it makes a lot of sense. And in tribes, hunter-gatherers, it's the same thing, that you're there to lean on each other. That you have hunters going out there, you got people like looking after children, everyone's got their roles. So to step out and be on your own and be all of those things is extremely difficult. So that's why as a human, it is difficult to stand up to certain rights and be isolated.
So I'm gonna and I'm just gonna hold my hands up, because this is something I've not heard of. So Veg Beauty said it. The enlightened one tried to tell the naive, and in turn, the naive killed him. And what I'll do is I'll read. I've actually via Wikipedia. The allegory of the cave, or Plato's cave, is an allegory presented by the Greek philosopher Plato in his work Republic to compare the effect of education and the lack of it in our nature. It is written as a dialogue between Plato's brother Glaucon and his, I'm really worried I'm mispronouncing these, and his mentor Socrates, narrated by the latter. The allegory is presented after the analogy of the sun, In the allegory, Socrates describes a group of people who have lived chained to the wall of a cave all of their lives, facing a blank wall. The people watch shadows projected on the wall from objects passing in front of the fire behind them and give names to these shadows. The shadows are the prisoner's reality, but not accurate representations of the real world. Three higher levels exist: natural sciences, mathematics, geometry, and a deductive logic, and the theory of forms. Socrates explains how the philosopher is like a prisoner who is freed from the cave and comes to understand that the shadows on the wall are not reality at all. A philosopher aims to understand and perceive the higher levels of reality. However, the other inmates of the cave do not even desire to leave the prison, for they know no better life. I think that's really apt for today's. I'm really glad you brought that to my attention. I really like that as a point of conversation. The analogy I used as, let's say, a layperson who's not really gone far into higher education, and I guess the metaphor I used, it was more about perception. And I think what Plato's Cave, for me, what I'm reading out of that is it's a perception piece and how you view your surroundings and how you approach those. And I very much, when I look at how people judge things, I always viewed that you could be living in a glass house and you can know every inch of that glass house. You could know it's square. I can know that the walls are 10 meters by 10 meters. I know I could walk around that blindfolded. And even though I live inside of this glass house, I don't actually know what that house looks like from the distance, yet I find security and safety in it. And this is where I stay. But I don't want to necessarily enter outside of that glass house to see that maybe my reality isn't quite what I think it is. And I think it's interesting when we look at today in even politics, and we talked about this, and we haven't watched Social Dilemma. We're going to watch it this weekend, by the way.
Okay.
We're when we go away. But it's very much, I think people tend to find their comfort zone and stay in their camps. When it comes, we talked about this last week. You know, you don't. It's very scary to leave sort of the protection of, if you're a Trump supporter or if you're pro-choice, pro-life, whatever the case may be. I think there's a huge element where you find your camp and you stay in the cozy comfort of that camp, because it's a scary thing to leave that camp and to realize you were wrong about a lot of things. I think there's a lot of ego involved in people that
absolutely.
I had no idea we were going to be going off on this direction. You have been the most enlightening commenter in the history of the channel, and we've been going for a whole year, and I think we've made like 40 videos, so we know what we're talking about. We know something about comments. But I think that really encapsulates sort of how things are going in this day and age. We talked about this last week.
Yes, mate. I think I was off on my explanation when Veg Beauty's come in and explained that. So my description was off. But yeah, I think you're spot on, mate. It is very, politics is polarizing. It's one or the other. It's red or blue. And that's a very sad state of affairs. And there are people that maybe stay on one of the teams, rightly or wrongly, out of fear of being ostracized totally and maybe not being accepted by the other side because of what they used to be. And it's like you said, I think there's a lot of ego at play, and you kind of lose the whole purpose, I suppose, of politics, that you're trying to govern a state as well as you can. And it just turns into just teams trying to outbeat each other, and it kind of defeats the whole object of it.
But I think that's why and I'll get to your next comment in a second. I think that's why when I look at people who are in those camps that I disagree with, and I think we had conversations about people that went on about masks, whatever you think about masks or science, or you can say the same for global warming. And, for the better part of a year, I would go on Facebook for whatever reason. I don't even bother doing it anymore. And I would fight the fight to try to help them, which is such an arrogant thing for me to do in itself. But I think sometimes we look at people who have, even, in our view, quite, I don't want to say disgusting views, but views that are just ridiculous in our views. And it's so easy to label them as a bad person. I think that's sort of the trend that's going. And I think it sort of creates that forced separation, where you can't invite somebody to disagree with you, and you can't allow somebody to disagree with you on something that you believe is absolutely ridiculous and erroneous. And it's so hard, I think, for people in this day and age to disagree vehemently with something that you or I may find just idiotic, and not judge somebody for them, or not even come across as being condescending. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. I think, I mean, that's one of the issues I think in society is that when someone is, if they come out with a bold statement, it might just be a lack of education, like more than anything else. Like you say, it's got nothing to do with the fact they're a bad person. They might just, they've been indoctrinated in a certain way. I used the example before with my dad that when we grew up watching sport, he would make me support whoever Wales were playing. So then we moved to England. I speak English, I sign English, but you'll see with my spelling it's Welsh. I'm from Welsh heritage, and we're told to support Wales to the death, and we got to support whoever England are playing because they're the bitter rivals. But from that indoctrination, that kind of stayed with me up until uni. Now that's the playful, it's a sporty thing, but there's a crossover with that. What about people that grow up in sexist, racist, ageist, whatever family, whatever their bias is, religious, they're just forcing people to think a certain way. So can we really, are they a bad person because they've listened to their parent for so long? That has been quite strong. It's actually something that would be largely out of their hands. The influence is already bedded when they were too young to do anything about it because you accept authority. So what I find difficult is that people could be uneducated, and it doesn't have to be as something as deemed serious in like politics. It could be things like food or health and welfare, and maybe not looking out for society. Just like other maybe perceived smaller issues. They're not educated, and people branding them as just a bad person overall. Or there's just one. Another example that comes out in the press is that these people with cancel culture that have got caught up with women or doing things that they shouldn't be doing and abusing their power. Now, they might be weak-willed, and I'm not justifying their actions, but what I'm saying is you can be weak-willed with females or of the opposite sex and still be a good person outside of that. You can still be atrocious with your diet and you are slowly killing yourself, but you can still be a good person in other areas of life and so on. But I think as a society, when we see one of these obvious flaws, no matter the severity, it's just like we're writing that person off, which I think is a real sad case.
Hugh, that's the thing called nuance that doesn't exist. I think it's a ridiculous thing to think that somebody could be good in one area and bad in another.
Yeah, it's sad.
So, and the other follow-up comment, Veg, is also another analogy is how whistleblowers treated and looked upon these days in today's society. I think that's interesting because that in the States that came up recently. Was it 2 years ago with I think whistleblower in the Trump administration. Whistleblower is always an interesting thing because sometimes people are viewed whistleblowers are viewed as troublemakers or people that aren't on team, and it's a bit of a dichotomy with on the other side of that you have the need to protect whistleblowers because if people don't feel safe, then they can't report things that are unjust. And if I was a director of a company, let's say, if we use the traditional example of a whistleblower, I would want everybody to feel safe that they can report bad things of the people that are above them. I think you have the same thing. This is a big leap. And you look at aeronautics, or you look at pilots, for example. I'm a big fan of the show Air Crash Investigation. Have you ever watched that?
Yeah, I remember. I never will, but I remember you talking about this. I know you're a fan.
So Veg Beauty, I'm going to double back to what you're saying, and you may think it's absolutely ridiculous analogy, but when we look at how airlines train pilots, this does connect to whistleblowers because they would have the pilot as being the commander in that position, and their authority is unquestionable. And there were planes that were crashing simply because the co-pilot or the first officer, whatever you want to call it, wasn't able to question that of the authority of the pilot, and the plane would crash because the pilot is all-knowing. Now, that's not the whole purpose of having redundant systems in an airplane. You want a redundant pilot who can say, no, actually, you're flying into the ground. Because in flying, that isn't an uncommon thing for pilots to get, I forget what it is. It's a fog over, and just they're so focused on tasks, they forget that the plane's going down. And that co-pilot's there to question that. And especially when you look at, there was a crash in Japan, and in Japan, the culture was very much, mentor, mentee. There was a lot of respect given to that mentor, almost to a fault. And, the idea that, we should be able to question authority is massive. And I think that's a very old, even in management now. I took a management class. This is how exciting my life is with training. I'm being trained to be a manager. And in that, we talked about, what sort of style of management do we want? And, what is the model now? And at one time it was a child pupil model, or sorry, parent pupil model, where you had to ask permission and people did things because it was okay with the manager. And now it's very much a collaborative situation where if you're in management, you very much want people to question you and to use their skill set and experience to add value to the team.
Yeah,
that is a big jump from the as far as whistleblower, but it's just interesting how, when you look at how whistleblowers is treated. Yes, so what we had a follow up on that. I'm still learning how to talk and read comments, and Hugh will know, Veg. I'm not good at multitasking. Yes, it's unfortunate
He's
that
terrible
at it. That now our people are starting to see the disadvantages of power hierarchies, change of command. I'm sure there's people that could, in the military, there is value in chain. Let me make sure it stays up there. In a chain of command, though, there are times where I think it's.
Yeah, but she is, in her fairness, she's saying to see the disadvantages, because she isn't saying that to get rid of. Because you're right, hierarchies are natural and needed for society. It's just that they can be some severe downsides.
So they say this is what the change of the age of Aquarius is supposed to be about, decentralizing power. So, Veg, I think you're a lot more educated than myself. Hugh, I can't speak on behalf of you. You do think gooder than me at times. Again, I'm not making fun. I'm just making fun of myself. I'm not familiar with the age of Aquarius. Decentralizing power, which if we look at what's going on in America, and I don't know where you're from, Veg. So I grew up in America. I live in Britain right now. And I grew up in the United States. And when we look at what's happening, I think the government in the US, and it's not quite the same here in the UK, worked very hard to decentralize power and to spread it out, states' rights, states' power. And there's a lot going on now where the government over there is taking control of a lot of things. And I mean, sorry, I'm so bad at doing comments and talking.
No, keep talking, Sean. It's okay. I'll keep it on under comments as well.
So it's actually in the stars that people start caring about this topic now, decentralizing power. It's something I think that, and Veg, you're from New York City. I'm originally from Philadelphia. I didn't know if there was any clues on the wall. I think it is something that is very much coming. I think even in the UK, we're looking at how power is doled out, and even in Manchester right now, have you seen what was going on there with coronavirus and all that business?
With decentralizing power, what?
Well, Manchester. So we have in the United Kingdom, we have right now that they're locking down certain areas, and Manchester is considered a high risk area. Yeah, and they're not buying into the data, and they don't want to be locked down, and they don't want to be forced to be locked down. Whereas in America, it's very much state driven. And there's a lot of conversations going on here and in the U.S. about that central power and who has control, and to what degree do you control your lives. And I think that very much links back to what we spoke about last week on, should you be allowed to keep your business open if, let's say, the government says you should close it down? This is a bit of a leap, but all these things are related.
Yeah, and I think she's spot on. It is just, it's so obvious now. It's huge with coronavirus, isn't it? That you have governments, these people making decisions that are genuinely, transforming people's lives, like devastating people's lives and families and societies. That it's a really big impact. I'm not here to say, what's kind of right or wrong, or I have solutions, but yeah, I think it's. I mean, I'm glad that I'm not in that position. First and foremost, making the calls, because God knows what to do. No, and the truth is, no, I haven't heard anyone with like a really sensible solution with it yet. Yeah, going back to her point with the disadvantages of the power hierarchies and chains. I don't know if I'm sure I've mentioned this before, Sean, but there's a book, Principles, by Ray Dalio, who's one of the biggest hedge fund managers in the world, and he's no longer with them, but he founded the company, and his principles are just fascinating. Like, if you look at his two main principles of life, and he believes principles govern everything. He had radical honesty and openness and transparency as the key virtues of working his company. So anyone could say anything to anyone, with respect. So anyone could come in brand new and be like, Ray, you as the founder, why are you doing this? And I don't quite agree with it. Why don't we do it this way? And you have an honest conversation about it. And it wasn't like, who's this guy? Who does he think he is? He's only just come here. They wanted to foster the environment where anyone can say anything and you challenge it. But you had, it's a difficult thing to do, because that means criticism will come through. And then people start to take things personal. But he just said you have to go down that route. Otherwise, you go down the negativity of hierarchy, where you've got basically one person making a call for everyone. And, there are nuances to things, like you mentioned, and it isn't always black and white. And you might have had the right intention, but it might not be working out for that person for this reason, and you may have overlooked something. So I love that book in general is fantastic, but he believes that, the first book of his like personal principles, the second half is on leadership, and he believes that that vehemently, like openness and transparency and radical honesty to anyone should be done respectfully, but you should be able to tell anyone anything. And I find that, like, I've been in management myself, and I value that. I think the best leaders are willing to listen to you, and vice versa. Like, you're willing to listen to anyone in turn. So I haven't had huge experience with it, but enough to know I think it really rings true.
When we look at that sort of structure and that conversation with, I guess a more modern view on there being a lot of people involved in the conversation and not having one person to steer the ship into oblivion, having other people that can jump in and say, no, that's not the case. You need to consider this. You need to consider that. I think it's about, I think historically we've seen, not just professionally, even politically, people are just generally ambivalent. And I think if you look at, even Veg, you were saying, people are starting caring now about not just this topic, but I think people are now just realizing with, climate change, with, what's going on with COVID, with, just any situation, people are now just becoming present and aware. And it's really crossing paths with this whole social media thing that I think we're going to be having a chat about in the coming weeks. People are now starting to care, but they're starting to bed down in camps. And just to pick up on what Veg just said, people think they're losing their businesses, et cetera, to save lives, but it was made clear from the beginning it was not to overwhelm the hospitals. Nobody's losing business to save lives. This is what's called a nuanced point of view from an American. I didn't know those existed until recently. But I really appreciate that there's people back home, Veg, that understand that it's not just about people losing businesses. I was going to ask you about this, Hugh, and just to finish up, it's because our healthcare system can't handle overload. And I've not heard many people back home, when I speak to them, necessarily understand that. I don't think that's necessarily a fault of anybody's. It's just not something people understand. I think in America, it's a nationalized healthcare system. No, sorry, it's a privatized healthcare system. It's the greatest in the world, and it's a good healthcare system in regards of people are lifespans are living just as long. People are getting the quality of care they need if they can afford it. I'm not going to get into the whole healthcare conversation, but I think it's just down to education. People don't necessarily understand what's at risk, and the messaging isn't there. You can only learn what based on the information, and not everybody has the time to spend hours reading about the impacts of COVID-19 on the healthcare system. I would say the average person going into, as a teacher or insurance salesperson, I don't even know, average Joe is going to necessarily know about that.
And I don't think our news stations in the UK, even, I can't speak for the US, are doing a great job of trying to help that situation. So the people that don't have a lot of time and are then catching up with radio or bits of TV here and there, and it's just so sensationalized and over the top and dramatic and anxiety driven, depressing. I don't think they're doing a great job of highlighting it. They're trying to get engagement and trying to manipulate things either way to try and instigate comments and attention, rather than actually distributing what is actually happening on a factual, logical, sensible basis, and actually taking some responsibility as leaders to try and help us deal with this really difficult situation. As a society, they have, I think they could do a far better job at that. You're spot on. Lack of education is at the root of a lot of these issues, because people just don't understand.
Although I would challenge that a little bit, because I don't think it's necessarily the media's job to educate, it's to inform. And part of the free society we live in, there's this whole thing with media, giving truth to power. And the only entities, and I think and I'm not a history professor, and I don't claim to know a lot. But I think media is one of those true last bastions of a free society in the UK and in the US, where leaders are put under the gauntlet to answer questions, and we make judgments on how they're handling issues based on how well they can run that gauntlet. And I think there's value in that still. And I think
there's value in media. I think they can do a better job. I don't think they do.
No doubt.
Handle it well.
Yeah.
And I think that actually informing is education. I think informing them of stats and informing them of realities of situation without getting carried away and going down certain paths which aren't necessarily kind of applicable, I think is part of education. It's not everything. And I don't believe, what I'm not saying is that they're solely responsible for it, but I think they can do a better job, and they are part of the process of education.
Yeah, but I think it also kind of doubles back to that. And this was one thing I did want to bring up with you. I did think about this because you were talking about that whole view that people should have some freedom to be able to, I guess, make a living and manage their lives. And if it means they need to keep their business open in difficult times, whether that's a bar or a restaurant or whatever the case may be, they should be allowed to do so. And people that are at risk need to stay home, which I think we agree more or less that just staying home isn't necessarily going to stop people who are isolating from getting ill. Yeah. However, what it made me think about, it just raised the question with me, at what point is it acceptable for the government to, let's say, make a determination on a business? So surely we would all agree that if a restaurant was on the edge of a cliff and we could see that there was erosion and it was going to fall into the sea in the next year, we would have no problem with the government shutting it down to protect ignorant patrons going in there and falling off of a cliff. And at what point does the situation with, let's say, COVID, for example, and closing a town down to protect people, where do those things come together, and where does personal freedom come into play?
Yeah, it's a very complicated topic, isn't it? And I've heard someone say that let's tackle this as a country as well, and in solidarity. I think that when you're locking down certain parts of the country and not others, they're again, one of the side effects to that is this disintegration again. Like, we want to try and be in all of this together. If there's a problem in society, let's try and tackle that. Another thing, we're behind. So whatever they're recording isn't the reality of today as well. So yeah, if we are going back to that, that's all, I don't know, and it's easy for me to say in my circumstances and my health and etc. I fear this less than a lot of people, but I prefer that we tackle it all together. We either have more freedoms together, or we lock down together, rather than this city's locked down, that city, you can kind of do what you want. I'm not a fan of that. I don't think it's a healthy message either overall.
Yeah, which actually ties into what you're saying with, I guess that's why it takes a village to raise a child, because I mean, when I read this comment, and it's not the comment, I can understand why you're asking it. These types of things are very stressful. Might not be the media's job to educate, but whose job is it? The school system is horrible. Graduates can't read, write, or tell time. And I'm sure that's true to a degree, but also we're living in a time where we have more information, and there's I've lived a charmed existence, and we both spoke about this. You and I have actually quite good lives, and we have access to information, and we know how to read, and we know how to understand certain things. And I'd like to think that we're switched on enough to not be overwhelmed by marketing or the message. When we go back to social media,
we kind of try to look through that.
Yeah, which links in very well to what you're saying, Veg. I guess that's why why it was said it takes a village to raise a child. I think there's a lot of people I think that's why you just have to be true to yourself and not get too stressed out about it's so easy to get stressed out about this. For me, this is easy to get stressed out about. And I think the only thing you can do is just keep going about your day with intention and with not genuine integrity, and just keep sharing what you know. And when we go back to that Plato's cave, it's also being willing to know that, me feeling, and this is kind of my view on why I don't stand on my soapbox anymore and give my opinion to people who clearly don't want it. There's an element where I could actually be wrong. I'm not, the be all and end all, the arbiter of knowledge. And there could be things that I'm absolutely wrong about. Climate change is, for example, it's undeniable. That's what scientists are saying, and I will go with what the scientists say. However, I'm not going to go as somebody who's never studied it to the degree a scientist has had and have an argument as to why everybody else who doesn't believe in climate change is wrong. And Veg has made a few other comments here. Freedom always comes with a price. Some believe that price isn't worth it, apparently. And then she mentioned Ben Franklin, which is a Philadelphia connection. So very well said. Ben Franklin said, "Those who give up liberty for security shall get neither." People forget that the discussion is over. People forget that the discussion is over. It already happened. The founding fathers already decided safety was not more valuable than freedom. Apparently, a lot of people weren't educated on that. These are really complicated points too. And I think if you were to present these points to anybody, they're gonna have some level of subjectivity to how they read that information.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could talk about one of those comments that Veg just put through. You could spend a lot of time on each one.
Yeah. Veg, I think you win the Silver Star for best ever commenter on the channel.
Yeah,
I think it's been, yeah. I mean, I had toyed about talking about the fact that I'm really good at breaking wind, and that was the one thing that I could do well in life, and that never happened. Only because that's what my wife said. She said to me, "It's a shame that you're not good at everything else as you are at that." Not to lower the tone, but I just want to show what range we have as a channel. From talking about sports to philosophy to ass. What
a great range we've had on this show in particular. And it's really nice to get into some more meaty stuff. And, we try and keep these videos below an hour. And I would, invite and encourage more of these type of comments coming in, because as you can say, we're still starting out with this. Me and Sean aren't, particularly educated from, a university standpoint, but we always follow this stuff. We're trying to better ourselves, and we're trying to put out the message of that. I think what's really key here, Veg, because I don't know if you're a follower. So if you're not, please subscribe, because you might take us into double figures. But what we try to put out there is one of the things I think that me and Sean are really good at is that we can disagree about stuff and we're still mates. And
it's crazy.
What we want to do is show the world that you can do that. Like, we can talk about difficult things and not really agree on stuff, and it's still cool. Like, what's wrong with that? We don't have to agree with you or any other comments, but just having a discussion about that and being calm and just, talking about what we know and admitting when we don't know, and just being fallible with that is the way we think it should be done. There should be more of that. So that's one of the reasons. It was a really core reason why me and Sean wanted to do this, because we always, when we hang out, we have these great chats and, stuff we agree on and laughing and being silly, but there are also things that we don't quite agree on, but it doesn't impact our relationship in any way. And we actually, I think, encourage it, don't we? We try and dig a little deeper to try and understand, well, what am I missing here? Then can you help me understand that? And vice versa. And I think that's a much healthier way of doing things.
Yeah, I think one of the main reasons I would give Veg the Silver Star for a great commenter, and why I think it was such a valuable asset to this show is I saw this comment and I thought, when we started to talk about our ignorance on the topic, a lot of people would have been really shitty about that in this day and age. For as much as I give shit to my friends who are quite conservative in their beliefs and quite, I don't want to say conservative, that's me throwing some biases around, but when I speak to people who I think are, when I say uneducated, I'm being such a dick because I'm not educated. But when I speak to people who I perceive as being uneducated, so I'm just going to get through that and just use my biases. Fuck it, they're there. I'm biased. On the other side of the coin, there's people who are in academia who throw around, in a negative way, throw around references, and when you don't know those references, you're perceived as being substandard or incapable of having a conversation because you haven't read X, Y, and Z. Exactly. And one thing I love about Veg is your comments. You helped us through that. Actually, you gave us some guidance as to what you were referring to, and I think I think that's an example of how the conversation should be had, because I think this conversation was more valuable because you stuck with us on that element. We saw this comment and you didn't just say, "I'll screw them, they didn't know what I'm talking about.
These guys are idiots."
Yeah, I mean, we are idiots. There's no doubt about that. However, you stuck with us. Yeah, to be fair, it would have been the right thing to do. But to stick with that, I think I was really appreciative of that, if I'm honest.
Yeah, likewise. Well said, mate.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think that's us for this week. We're coming up to our hour, mate.
Yeah. What a great what a great live show. I think it does make a difference, isn't it, going live?
Yeah, getting the cut. Yeah, I think we need to keep doing this. So Veg, if you are watching next week, we will be same time next week. We do a review of a vintage TV show, which has nothing to do with anything we've talked about today, and we'll be airing that on the Friday. And if we can get some chunks, this is going to be a challenging one, because what I wanted to do is get these little 10-15 minute chunks, which will probably air a video about the COVID bit that I talked about at the beginning with my symptoms, and then we'll probably air this one separately. But yeah, keep an eye out. Watch this moving forward. I'm now rambling on and making absolutely no sense, so I'm going to pass it to you, Hugo. Any thoughts before we wrap up?
No, just thanks again. Thanks again for you, mate, for bringing this to the table, for Veg's comment, for those at home watching us and supporting what we do. And, you know, like Veg's displayed for this video, like we're at the start of this thing. So if people are going to engage with us, what else are we doing? Like, we're going to engage with you, so get involved and let's have a discussion about stuff and do it the right way and show people how to do it.
Even if it's a dissenting view, I have no problem with that. You know, that's something that we welcome. So, well, listen, Eddie, I am going to call it for this week. So next week on next Friday, we'll be airing our next review, which is the highly cerebral TV show Baywatch review. And Magnum PI was fun this week.
We just lost Veg.
Yeah. Go on. Never see her again. Or him. Could be a him. But we'll do Baywatch next week, and then we'll see where the next call goes.
Sounds great. You have a great rest of your weekend and good week, mate. And I'll speak to you soon.
All right. We'll catch up with you guys later. Take care.
See ya.